Now, a survey commissioned by the Republican National Committee has led the party to basically admit that nobody is believing their lies about the Trump tax cuts that went into effect earlier this year. Now, what were those lies? Well, that it's going to create jobs, and that the tax cuts, well, they're going to help you. They're going to help the middle class. They're not going to help the rich at all. In fact, you had this entire narrative that, oh, no, these tax cuts, they don't help. They're not going to help rich people and corporations. No, these tax cuts are for you. They're for you guys. Well, it turns out that voters disagree. They overwhelmingly say that these tax cuts help the wealthy instead of average Americans. In fact, by a 2-to-1 margin, 61% to 30% of respondents said the law benefits, quote, large corporations and rich Americans over middle-class families, according to the survey, which was completed on September 2nd by the GOP firm Public Opinion Strategies. Now, the result was fueled by self-identified independent voters who said by a 36% margin, a point margin, that large corporations and rich people benefit more from the tax law. A result that was even more lopsided among Democrats. Now, what's interesting, by a 38-point margin, Republican voters said that, oh, no, the middle class, they benefit more. But wait a minute. Again, 83% of the benefits of this tax cut went to rich people and corporations. But you have 38% of Republicans who are not living in reality who's like, oh, no. Middle class, they benefited more from these tax cuts. Now, actually, I can explain that. They aren't necessarily living in an alternate reality, but they are living in a reality of where they're incredibly well off. See, there's a study about a few years ago that I remember seeing where people that are actually quite wealthy believe that they are middle class. Now, this is a 2017 survey by Northwestern Mutual. And this is the most recent one I can find, but there were ones a couple of years back. They found that 70% of Americans consider themselves in the middle class. 70%. That's not true. A 2015 report from the Pew Research Center shows that the middle class had been shrinking over the past 4 decades and now makes up less than half of the United States total population. And I would argue that it's actually a lot lower than that over the last 3 years. So what you have here is that you've got a pretty big chunk of people who are not middle class, who are actually upper class, who are actually fairly wealthy, not like super rich or anything like that, but they're making good money. They don't have to worry about anything. These people believe that they are middle class. These are people that are part of the top 10%. So they're like, what are you talking about? I'm middle class, and these tax cuts are fantastic. You know, I'm getting back, or I'm saving $10,000 a year. Well, that's true for them, but that doesn't make you middle class. Now, of course, there are caveats and things. For example, it matters a lot where you live. So if you're making $200,000 a year in New York or LA, that definitely is middle class. You could argue maybe even some lower middle class in some neighborhoods, right? But if you're in Alabama or Michigan and you make that much, you're definitely higher than middle class. So it all depends on where you live. And of course, how you define the middle class. And that really hasn't been very well defined. And again, going back to some polls, people that are making $500,000 or more are like, no, what are you talking about? I'm middle class. I'm not making $1 million a year. So I must be middle class because I'm certainly not a member of the 1% or the 0.1%. So that kind of explains who those voters actually are. The 38% that think, oh, no, those tax cuts have benefited me greatly and not the rich and corporations, when they actually are kind of considered part of the rich. But anyway, that said, it's pretty clear that a majority of Americans know that they are not benefiting from these tax cuts, which, as I said before, 83% goes to the rich and corporations. However, despite this, and this is the part that of the poll that deeply frustrates me, when it comes to approval for the tax law, American voters remain torn, 44% in favor and 45% opposed. No, it should be. I don't know why 70% of the American population doesn't oppose this tax law, or more than 99% of Americans. I mean, look, if it's for the rich and corporations and it benefits mostly them, which of course they're saying, why don't more people hate it? Why? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. I mean, maybe it's because they're starting to believe the Republican narrative on lower taxes for the rich. Saying that, no, this tax law benefits corporations and rich people is different than saying that, well, I don't like it because it benefits corporations and rich people. You see what I mean? I think that Republican narrative that we have been fed over the past 30 years, that, oh, you don't understand, we have to lower taxes on the rich and we have to lower taxes on corporations so that we can create jobs. I think people resonate, or I should say that argument resonates with more people. And so, unfortunately, that's why you have, I think, those numbers. They're buying the bullshit trickle down since Ronald Reagan. But of course, that's not true. There have been, since the Trump tax cuts have been passed, there's been no evidence of accelerated economic growth. Wages haven't go up. Wages are still stagnant. There are not more jobs. We have pretty much the same amount of job growth now than we did under President Obama. And in fact, in some quarters, job growth under Obama surpasses that of quarterly job growth under Donald Trump and under these administration's tax policies. So you can't make an argument that it's really done a whole lot, especially for jobs, as I said, especially for wages and things like that. But it has done something. It increased the level of stock buybacks by a ton. Stock buybacks, of course, inflates the market and makes companies appear to be worth more than they're actually worth, despite the fact that they don't have actually increased sales. They're not actually doing better. That actually creates a bubble. And you know what happens with bubbles? They burst. Now, on that, back to the poll here. Now, Republicans say, as a result of this poll, that they have lost the messaging battle. The RNC commissioned report said, quote, voters are evenly divided on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but we have lost the messaging battle on the issue. Furthermore, the RNC study says Americans worry that the tax law will lead to cuts in Social Security and Medicare, concluding that most voters believe that the GOP wants to cut back on these programs in order to provide tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy. Now, what have progressives been saying since, I guess, forever? Because you can go back to old comics from the 1920s and 30s that basically say the same thing. We have been saying that, guess what? They want to cut these popular programs so that they can cut taxes for the rich. And it's what they always do, funnel more money to their donors. Now, of course, the Republican study says, oh, no. We think it's because of a fairly disciplined Democratic tack against the recent tax cuts. No. Americans actually know that it's a reality. You think most Americans are paying attention to Democrat attack tactics? No. They can see the difference in their paycheck. They can see the difference in their wallet. When you only save $1.50 in your from your taxes, but then you look And you see these people, that are ultra wealthy, saving over $60,000 a year, buying an extra yacht. You tend to realize that, wait a minute, I thought those tax cuts were supposed to help me. Turns out they're not helping me. I got an extra $1.50. What am I supposed to do with that? Get a candy bar? Wow. Gee, thanks, Paul Ryan. You've really saved me a whole lot of money there. They know when they're getting screwed. They know when things are unfair, even if they don't know the details. So, and of course, like I said, they are worried. They are worried that these tax cuts are going to lead to cutting of benefits in so-called entitlement programs, which are actually earned benefit programs, like Social Security and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid. In fact, one of the recent budgets that President Trump had put out had $800 billion in cuts to Medicaid. Billions of dollars in cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So you can't say that they don't want to do that. They have told you, they have telegraphed that they absolutely will do it. In fact, you have prominent Republicans in the administration like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's wet dream since college was to cut your Social Security and Medicare. Larry Kudlow, he was talking about cutting Social Security and Medicare to pay for the tax cuts just recently. In fact, when he was speaking at the Economic Club of New York, he's in the club, and of course we're not in the club, he had this exchange with CNBC's Becky Quick. She asked, will the Trump administration tackle entitlement reform? He said, well, we've already tackled a big part of the newest entitlement, namely Obamacare. So the reason, of course, that your insurance is going up is because the Republicans mess with the ACA to make sure you end up paying more. Congratulations. Then he also says, as for the larger entitlements, I think everyone's going to look at that probably next year. I don't want to be specific. I don't want to get ahead of our own budgeting, but we'll get there. And as CNBC previously reported as well, Kudlow added the White House is determined to reduce federal spending, and part of the Republican plan is to curb spending, is tackling entitlements. Not reducing the Pentagon budget. In fact, they just passed an even larger Pentagon budget, where basically all the Democrats and most of the Republicans passed this gigantic increase. I think it was, Rand Paul, which is one of the ones that didn't vote for it. And of course, Bernie Sanders also didn't vote for this increase. So Americans, of course, that are worried about this are absolutely correct to worry. They do want to rob your Social Security. They do want to rob your Medicare to pay for these tax cuts. And so now, nonetheless, Republicans, even though they're worried about this, they're still trying to conduct one last heist. In fact, they're planning to hold a floor vote next week for tax cuts 2.0. So this would not only make the normal rates that were in the first round of tax cuts permanent, but also lower tax cuts or lower taxes for the rich even more. So they know that they need to do something quick because look, they want to do one last robbery before we hit them with the blue wave, because it ain't looking good for the Republicans in November. They know these tax cuts are deeply, deeply unpopular because they know it mostly benefited their donors. That was the whole point of the tax cuts. They knew that from the beginning, and they tried to sell the American people on a bullshit lie. And guess what? The American people were not falling for it. They caught on to the scam immediately. And so Republicans are like, let's go, let's hurry up, let's pass this so that we can steal the money and give it to our donors before we get our asses kicked. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.